Welcome to this presentation on defensive breathing, how to mount a strong first-line defense and protect your lungs against infectious disease, polluted air, and fire smoke. This is Lisa Bowen. I'm a breathing coach at Breathing Retraining Center in Marin County, California, a half-hour north of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Breathing retraining is a self-management approach that's been employed up to now to identify and correct poor breathing habits that often underlie chronic illness and lagging sports performance. These days, healthy breathing habits can be consciously engaged to counter some of the effects of living in a polluted or infectious environment, too. Before we go further, please bear with this disclaimer. I'm a massage practitioner and a wellness coach, not a licensed medical professional or other healing arts practitioner as defined by the state of California. Any comments about improving breathing skills are intended for people whose issues may be related to habits that have the potential to be improved as a self-care wellness activity. Breathing difficulty may be a warning sign of a life-threatening heart or lung condition, infection, or other illness, so always check with your doctor about your own situation. In this presentation, I'm talking about an alternative self-management approach and not the practice of medicine, psychology, or a form of psychotherapy. Finally, the statements made in this presentation have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. Any products or ideas mentioned in this video are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. For further details related to this disclaimer, please pause this slide and read it completely, or look at the longer disclaimer at breathingretrainingcenter.com. Now, many people I meet who ask me about what I do reject the notion that how we breathe matters, or that breathing skillfully, whatever that means, would have any significant impact on their lives. In fact, a new student of mine who's really disciplined and improved his eating and exercise regimens completely on his own told me he signed up for breathing coaching because while he learned a lot about breathing better by reading and watching videos, it didn't seem tangible, so he didn't do it. Let's explore that. We breathe to draw oxygen into the body that can aid the metabolism of digested food into energy. The body doesn't store oxygen. It does store digested food, typically broken down into glucose to be transformed into the molecular unit of currency the body can use called ATP. This slide shows the difference between how much ATP can be made for the same amount of glucose, depending upon whether oxygen is present or not. If there's oxygen present in the cell for a given amount of glucose, 38 units of ATP will be created. If oxygen is not present, only 2 units of ATP will be created. That's a huge difference of energy available to keep your organs, muscles, and brain healthy, right? Now, breathing is an automatic process. We breathe about 20,000 times a day. It happens whether we're thinking about it or not, whether we're awake or asleep. So why the heck would oxygen not be present in our cells? Now, this is a gross simplification, but oxygen is released into cells under the conditions of nasal breathing, not mouth breathing, on purpose. It's a function of several biomechanical, biochemical, and psychophysiological factors coming together. It seems like you're breathing a lot more when you're mouth breathing. And you are. But what's actually happening is that while you're breathing quickly and your chest is rising and falling like the bellows of an accordion during a fast jig, much of the air is just blowing in and out without getting deep into the lungs. Think about when you throw up a meal and what went in just came out. This is a small list of conditions that can be affected in some way when breathing is off. Now, there is a place for mouth breathing, which is the nervous system's way of quickly signaling the body to mobilize to run away or fight in an emergency like this. And for some athletes, there's also some benefit to breathing anaerobically at the time they're doing sports with quick moves, like the 100-meter run, football, and weightlifting. But other than that, our bodies are designed to breathe through our nose, although most modern people have what's called a mixed respiratory pattern, part or mostly oral and part nasal. That's because mouth breathing is stress breathing, and boy, are we under a lot of stress. The emergency signaling aspect of mouth breathing is managed by the reptilian part of our brains, not the cognitive human thinking brain that is totally bypassed on this. In our caveman past, most crises required some physical effort to escape. So, what mouth breathing does is prompt the blood immediately to start flowing away from the head, digestive organs, immune system, just to name a few, into the limbs, the arms and the legs. The whole thing was designed to last a matter of minutes and be over, at the end of which we were dead or had survived. Most mammals still operate like this. Our bodies haven't caught up with the complex, extended emergencies of modern life, like I don't have the money to pay my taxes, or how am I going to make a living while I can't work during this coronavirus shelter in place thing. Back to our virus and pollution focus. The nose has a couple layers of filters in place to strain out the bad stuff upon entry. Whatever air you breathe with your mouth goes straight into the lungs with no filtration. Droplets from somebody else's cough go straight into the lungs. Particulate matter from pollution goes straight into the lungs unless you're lucky enough to cough it up and out. Even after hearing a talk like this, maybe it's hard for people who are out of shape, sick and congested, or under stress to start nasal breathing without a dedicated effort. If you've been breathing like this for a long time, your body may also have adapted physically and changed the shape of your airway, making it feel even stranger to try to revert back to the more natural nasal breathing. People with small airways may need to work on their posture or see a dentist, orthodontist, or osteopath to assess their airway and see what they can do with neuromuscular exercises or appliances to expand the size on top of what I'm going to suggest. So, the advice when you find yourself in an unhealthy, toxic, or polluted environment, and when you want to boost your immune system and health, is to engage and repattern your breathing to follow this formula. Breathe with your nose, stop breathing with your mouth, and breathe less. Now, let's go into more details about how this works. First, against viruses. The main reason nasal breathing shores a protective defense against infectious disease is that when we breathe with our nose, nitric oxide, the gas, is released. It sanitizes the inhaled air, killing germs. There are several studies over the years that have found nitric oxide to be the body's first line of defense against infectious disease. 3 in particular are up on the screen. We may infer from them that nasal breathing helps defend against the coronavirus and COVID-19, but there's no proof. The COVID-19 mechanism is unknown, and there are no studies showing that nasal breathing will stop COVID-19. But there are many papers showing that the release of nitric oxide produced in the paranasal sinuses during nasal breathing helps defend against airborne viruses, which are spread as droplets of saliva or mucus. In 2013, an article named Evidence for the Cure of Flu Through Nose Breathing was published in the International Journal of Advanced Research. Quoting from the summary, quote, research told us that nitric oxide has confirmed function of destruction of viruses, parasitic organisms, and malignant cells in the airways and lungs by inactivating their respiratory chain enzymes. Nitric oxide inhibits the replication of influenza viruses, probably during the early steps of the virus's replication cycle, involving the synthesis of vRNA and mRNA encoding viral proteins. Thus, nitric oxide is responsible for the cure of flu by killing influenza virus, unquote. 2 other studies are listed here. One found nitric oxide contributed to the protective role of the white blood cells in killing certain microorganisms, and the other demonstrated an antiviral effect on inhibiting the replication cycle of the SARS virus in the early stages of infection. I don't know about you, but this is enough to inspire me to keep my mouth shut as much as possible when I'm not eating, talking, or smiling. Remember the earlier point about all the additional energy created in our cells with aerobic energy production, 38 units of ATP as opposed to the paltry 2 with mouth breathing. Which extreme do you think potentially represents a stronger immune system? Now let's move on to how nasal breathing blocks the inhalation of particulate matter from pollution. First, some background that breathing pollutants is a tangible, real threat. 9 out of 10 people worldwide breathe air containing high level of pollutants, according to the World Health Organization. If you're living in a metro area or you travel, you're exposed. The most vulnerable among us include those with pre-existing heart disease, lung conditions and diabetes, seniors and children, pregnant women, and poor and homeless people who are simply outside more. Other more individual factors are how close you live or work to the freeway or an industrial site. Air pollution particles are invisible, but they're a deadly weapon, responsible for 7 million deaths a year around the world at this time. It's intuitively clear how pollution can contribute to all varieties of lung disease, from asthma and allergies to COPD and respiratory infections. But 70% of pollution-related deaths come from heart attack and stroke because of the inflammation it causes, as well as how particles can dislodge fatty plaque in the blood vessels and create clots. And that has nothing to do with whether you're in shape or not. A study of healthy college students in Shanghai showed their biomarkers of inflammation noticeably worsened just after 2 days of exposure to airborne particles. Air pollution contributes to almost half the premature deaths from lung disease and about a quarter of deaths from lung cancer, stroke, and heart disease. This information seemed pretty academic to me, and I didn't feel a connection with it, like if it was real or that it might possibly happen to me. But in February, I read this article about a 39-year-old woman in New Jersey who suffered a massive heart attack while she was driving, with 100% blockage of a coronary artery, just 2 weeks after she'd had her annual physical and had been given a perfect bill of health. It literally came out of nowhere, she said. I didn't believe them. If it wasn't for me waking up in the hospital with the tubes in my arms and the oxygen in my nose, and I could tell I'd been intubated because my throat was hurting, I would never have believed it. I wondered if this might be an example of pollution-related heart disease that comes on because of an inhaled pollutant. Of course, we'll never know. Now, I want to share some good news with you borne out by research. How you breathe in polluted environments matters. Breathing well, in the way I'm going to share soon, matters, makes a difference. Before I do share that, I want to talk about the components of pollution so you'll better understand how and why the defensive breathing strategy and tactics work. Air pollution elements come from many sources. I already talked about nitric oxide sanitizing incoming air. What we also have partial power over is how and whether we inhale particles, those microscopic pieces of plastic, dust, dirt, smoke, and soot. The nose is lined with fine hair-like projections called cilia that sweep back and forth, kind of like seaweed in the ocean, to expel foreign objects. Much of what gets through is then captured in sticky mucus in the nasal sinuses. Together, cilia and mucus collect dust, bacteria, and other debris and eliminate them. Scientists at the EPA told a colleague that the nose filters out particulate matter down to 0.5 microns. The nose will filter any particulate matter that's 0.5 microns and above, they told senior breathing educator Robert Littman of Vashon, Washington. Particulate matter is referred to by size in microns. A micron is a millionth of a meter. Microns are truly microscopic. To put things in perspective, a grain of fine beach sand is 90 microns in diameter. A human hair, 50 to 70 microns. Particulate matter health officials are concerned about ranges from 10 microns down to 0.1 micron. Many studies refer to PM 2.5. That's particles 2.5 microns in diameter or less, 45 times smaller than a grain of sand, as the most dangerous to human health. And here is a cross-section of a human hair with a particle or two inside it. They're just tiny. So you really want to stop mouth breathing. So many people pant, huff, and puff that mouth breathing has become seemingly normal, but it's not. That air goes straight into the lungs, as is with no filtration. We have to practice stopping mouth breathing. It just doesn't happen because breathing is an autonomic function of the nervous system. We don't pay attention to our breathing. So few people are consciously aware whether they're breathing with their mouth or their nose at any given time. It's a subconscious habit. So how do you start making breathing changes? Tune into your breathing several times a day. Are you breathing with your mouth or nose? Focus on breathing gently with your nose only. If that's uncomfortable, practice breathing less with your mouth as a first step. Ideally, find times when you can blend your gentle breathing practice into other regular habits of your daily routine. Start when you're not moving, and over time, it becomes possible to practice reduced calm breathing with your nose, even during sports. We breathing educators are very attuned to the difference between nasal and mouth breathing, but this has not caught on in the medical or wellness establishment as the health imperative we think it should be. So this information is very interesting to us, especially since many pollution-related studies that track breathing statistics do it in the aggregate, not distinguishing the effects between mouth and nose breathers. In that way, what I'm saying is not verified. It's an extension of the logic from scientific reports. As Robert Littman reported in a recent Breathing Educator Association newsletter after he talked to EPA officials, the government and other institutions speak about the entry of particulate matter into the lungs and heart by way of the nose and mouth, he said. I've talked to experts from the Environmental Protection Agency, and they have no language for speaking to people about not using their mouths for breathing. Another related point from Robert is that the EPA folks told him that particulates in wildfire smoke are about 0.3 microns. So those particles go directly into the lungs, heart, and bloodstream, landing in any organ in the body. So when there's smoke in the air, we really should wear the respirator mask. Unmasked defensive breathing is not enough. From the German Environment Agency, we learned that particles 3 microns or less in diameter are respirable, meaning they can be breathed into the lungs, and particles less than 1 micron are small enough to enter the bloodstream. Now, I just mentioned from Robert Littman that the nose filters particles greater than 0.5 microns. So how are particles from 0.5 up to 3 microns entering the body? Must be through the mouth. So this chart shows exposure to particles by size and their links to common health conditions. Most of these conditions are caused by exposure to particles larger than 0.5 microns. That would mean a lot of suffering from allergies, bronchitis, emphysema, asthma, and even a portion of alveolar damage in the lungs, described in the middle bar of this chart, might be a result of mouth breathing. Is it possible to imagine, given these numbers, even if they're a bit different from study to study, as one might expect, that a person who breathes with only or primarily their nose and polluted air would have a better health outcome? This slide describes the Environmental Protection Agency's rubric for assessing future health risks from inhalation of particulate matter. It's buried in a discussion of inhaled manganese in Neurotoxicology Journal in 2006. The EPA found deposition within the respiratory tract depends on particle size, style of breathing, oral nasal versus nasal, and tidal volume. Tidal volume is essentially how much air you're inhaling. This is a scientifically validated source saying that we can have some control over the quantity of toxic pollutants that enter our body by focusing on our style of breathing, mouth versus nose, and how much air we breathe. The third defensive breathing strategy is to breathe just enough air and no more. The EPA report in the last slide mentioned tidal volume. That's how much air someone is breathing by volume, typically measured per minute. Unfortunately, we're experiencing a double whammy. As pollution is rising, so is the volume of air people are breathing. Due to chronic stress and sedentary lifestyles, the average person today tends to be overbreathing at the rate of twice as much air per minute as people studied before World War II, after which respiratory volume started climbing decade over decade, according to research done by a Canadian breathing educator named Artur Rakimov. So, aside from the pollution issue, overbreathing is a major public health issue in its own right, causing an imbalance of the blood gases and pH, destabilizing blood and brain chemistry, and interfering with healthy body functioning. For many people watching this, the instruction to breathe less requires a serious adjustment to get comfortable. It's counterintuitive because of the feeling of shortness of breath that has to be worked with very sensitively and gently. Most people assume that we innately reflexively know how to breathe appropriately, but in the last century, the human environment changed dramatically, and our breathing has deteriorated due to factors including unhealthy diets, lack of exercise, as well as airtight dwellings. Okay. Here's a chart that shows the average tidal volumes of small samples over time, from 1929 to the 2000s, that Artur Rakimov tracked from medical studies. Medical researchers have gauged the optimal amount of air to breathe for a healthy person at rest is about 6 liters of air per minute. 6 liters per minute is at the far left bar on the chart. It says norm. The sample started exceeding that in 1950, and it doubled in 1990 and held. As a rule of thumb, the more someone breathes gently and small, inhaling just enough oxygen to metabolize food into energy to fuel the activity of the moment, the healthier they are considered as measured by their pulse, blood pressure, and respiration rate. So to reiterate, unless you're doing something where it's advisable to breathe another way, it's best to breathe defensively as much as you can. Breathe with your nose, stop breathing with your mouth, and breathe less. Now I'd like to just talk about a few ways that anybody can practice. The cloud exercise is a wonderful, gentle breathing activity developed by senior breathing educator Tess Graham. You can find her at www.breathability.com in Australia. She's written 2 books. One is Relief from Snoring and Sleep Apnea, and the other is Relief from Anxiety and Panic. They're both about breathing retraining, and you can get them on Amazon. She also refers to this as shrinking your cloud. What you do is imagine all the air you breathe during 24 hours as a cloud. Then over the next 24 hours, and starting right now, think about reducing the total air you breathe by just 1%, maybe 1 to 5%, but 1% is okay too compared to what you breathed yesterday. How do you do this? Aim to breathe more gently. You can achieve this either through breathing more gently through your nose, if you're already nose breathing, or by doing more nose breathing and less mouth breathing. If your nose is really congested or you find it too uncomfortable to breathe through your nose, then you can still try a 1 to 5% reduction in the amount of air you breathe each day through your mouth. You're still reducing overbreathing, and this actually helps clear your nose. It's most important to stay comfortable. Allow yourself satisfying breaths and don't push yourself out of your comfort zone. It usually doesn't take long to adapt. And by progressively increasing the time you nose breathe each day, you'll be shrinking your cloud. Practice breathing gently with no sound or movement. This is an activity we like to use to teach children. Act like you're a prey animal and a predator is around. Notice, is my breathing audible to someone across the room or sitting right next to me? Can I hear myself breathing? What about visually? Is my chest moving in and out? Are my shoulders rising? Try to breathe imperceptibly so no one else would notice with their senses that you're breathing. Practice breathing gently at various times of day when you're waiting for something, or it's easy to do in conjunction with another habit you already have in your daily routine. Remember, you're breathing all the time. Breathing retraining is based on working with the limited control over breathing that's available to us by deliberately making small changes to our breathing pattern a couple times a day for short periods of time, which will begin to change the automatic programming the rest of the time. Practice at stressful times. When you get upset or when someone's upset with you, and that brings up fear, your breathing tends to increase, and as this is interpreted as a personal emergency, you might start mouth breathing. I selected these photos to represent people who are upsetting me, but notice they are upset themselves and both their mouths happen to be open. When that happens, notice it and be upset with your mouth closed. Notice how just the act of closing your mouth and breathing with your nose centers you more, and you come up with more options to consider how to handle the situation. Nasal breathing sends more oxygen to the brain. The cognitive, social brain is online and can pause and make better decisions. An old yogi trick is to practice breathing less by reducing your breathing by blocking one nostril with a Kleenex or something for 10 minutes at a time or so throughout the day as a way to insert a change in your breathing pattern. Try it and notice what happens. Even when you have a cold and your nose is stuffed, it will likely open up. Gentle breathing can do that. Think back to a time when you were in a rose garden or caught a whiff of a fruit blossom on a tree as you walked past and wanted to smell it again. The best way to find the scent again is to take gentle, small whiffs. Another example is smelling the bouquet at a wine tasting. Most people I talk to are completely unaware when they're mouth breathing, so it's very instructive to watch other people and then catch yourself doing it too. Particularly look for gasping for a quick breath between words while talking, and mouth breathing while eating. Eating with the mouth open is considered impolite, but often it's a habit of mouth breathing. If someone's used to getting air with their mouth every few seconds, they're going to have to do it when they eat too. Is your mouth open? Observe whether your mouth is open to breathe, especially when you talk, eat, exercise, or watch TV. It can also happen when you get in and out of the car, get up from a chair, get in and out of the shower, get in the cold swimming pool, lake, or river, or bend down to tie your shoes or put your socks on. Remember, breathing is an automatic, autonomic process that happens an average of 20,000 times a day. The most well-known breathing educator in the world is Patrick McEwen in Ireland, who's written several internationally published books on the Buteyko breathing technique. I heard him say in a panel discussion at a conference once that only 2% of people who read books or watch instructional videos will retrain their breathing to a healthy norm. I believe that's because breathing happens unconsciously or subconsciously, and we need to retrain it with a certain level of intensity for a period of time to really make a change. Breathing coaching can be helpful if you want a professional breathing assessment with a recommendation of what breathing activities or exercises to focus on and in what sequence. You want an expert to observe what you're doing and tell you how to improve. Maybe you want an accountability partner to keep motivation and momentum high, or you've hit a snag and want to get back on track. Thank you very much, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions.